Sato Company.
Mark Zuckerberg's story starts on the banks of the Hudson River, an hour away from New York and its bustle. It's here in Dobbs Ferry, an elegant and peaceful suburb of 10,000 inhabitants, that Mark Zuckerberg grew up. With his parents and his three sisters, Mark grew up normally in this typical American house. His father, a dentist, had his office on the ground floor, where he is still practicing. As if nothing had happened in the last 7 years, as if the staggering success of his son Mark had in no way changed the tenor of his family life. Edward Zuckerberg, nicknamed Painless Dr. Z by his patients, never answered our request for an interview. So we turned up for an unexpected visit. And surprise, surprise, no secretary. Mark's father, Edward Zuckerberg himself, opened the door. Like his son, he cultivates a very simple appearance. No suit, he dresses simply for work. Very soon, we noticed a little Facebook sign inviting us to become a fan of the surgery. If nothing seems to have changed in 7 years in this modest-looking practice, that's only an impression, and it explains Dr. Zuckerberg's silence.
I mean, if it didn't go any further than that, then they have no interest in going any further.
Yeah, I mean, I understand they always have to clear it.
Yeah.
They are Facebook's communications officers. Without their agreement, the site's creator's own father is not allowed to answer the press freely.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Have a good day.
During our inquiry, we discovered that those journalists allowed to approach the young prodigy are few and far between. That's because they are carefully chosen by Facebook. This man is one of the happy few, David Kirkpatrick. Mark Zuckerberg himself chose this journalist to write his official biography, The Facebook Effect. 300 pages to the glory of the 26-year-old CEO.
Mark Zuckerberg was the second of 4 kids, the only boy. I think he was always treated very well. In fact, a nickname for him in the family was the Prince. And he has a very good relationship with his parents.
His attentive parents encouraged their little prince at his favorite sport, fencing. But in fact, the young boy soon discovered another passion, computers.
He read a programming for dummies book when he was around 12, and he was doing some networking in the home computers. Shortly thereafter, he did an automated Risk game for his own enjoyment. He did a lot of things with technology from a very young age.
His passion for computers took him over completely. He became a geek, an expert in his favorite field. Long series of numbers, entire pages of code, enough to put off most teenagers. But Mark didn't care what others thought and pursued his thirst for knowledge. He took part in quizzes and the debating club, concentrating on history and politics. An oddball. And even though he was 3 years in advance, Mark soon needed more than his high school classes. Mark was the gifted student personified, and it was his father who found the solution.
He decided that he really wanted to study it formally, and his father helped him find this tutor, David Newman, who he studied with weekly for an entire year. And then when he kind of graduated out of that, he started taking a formal course at a local college, Mercy College, where he was really by far the youngest kid in the class, and it was a class intended for adults.
Like many other students, Mark Zuckerberg was the victim of continuous hazing, probably to such an extent that it forced him to change schools, to go far away from bad memories. To continue his studies, Mark chose the distant and prestigious Phillips Exeter Academy, one of the best high schools in the United States. But it's located in Boston, more than 4 hours away from his home. At the age of only 16, Mark decided to leave his family in search of excellence. And it was at this school, 1 year later, surrounded by the elite, that Mark was to have his first stroke of genius.
But when Mark was a senior in high school, he and his friend Adam D'Angelo wrote a program called Synapse, that watched the music that you listened to and recommended more music that you were likely to like, and it was extremely popular.
For Mark, who was only 17, it was just a game. As he unselfconsciously described himself in his blog, developer guy, team leader, likes Chinese girls, programmer god, the nerd. Mark didn't really believe that his software was becoming a real success. In just a few days, thousands of web surfers were using his program. On the web, everyone, including world internet leaders, wanted to know who was hiding behind this brilliant idea.
Later, he was offered more than $1 million by several companies to purchase it. I think they talked to Microsoft and also AOL about Synapse. What it says about his talents at the time was that he was extremely facile with software. He was very good at figuring out what kind of product might suit the market at that given moment, because it was very cutting edge. And it also says, in that he didn't sell it, that he wasn't doing it for the money.
Of the 30,000 students who apply to Harvard every year, only 2,000 are accepted. Like all the other students, Mark Zuckerberg had his room in one of these brick houses. He was in the Kirkland dormitory, an 8-square-meter room, like the one this student just let us into. Rob is also studying computer science and dreams of succeeding, like Mark Zuckerberg.
Lived in Kirkland House. I'm sort of trying to fill his shoes, but that'd be hard. In any case, I think a lot of Harvard students see what Mark Zuckerberg did and want to accomplish great things like that, huge things like that.
7 years after he left, Mark's ghost still haunts the corridors of Harvard.
He was here before my time here, but as I understand, he didn't have the best reputation.
What do you mean by that?
Rob weighs his words, and he thinks a good long time before answering.
I didn't know the guy, really. I just heard some offhand comments about things.
What'd you hear?
I heard he was emotionless. I heard you could talk to him, and you knew there was a person back there. But you couldn't see any signs of human... I shouldn't piss off Mark Zuckerberg. That's a bad idea. It's not going to.
Difficult to criticize the man who today is worth $14 billion. Especially since Facebook has just contacted this young computer expert to recruit him. Rob has also created a promising application, but if he hopes for it to succeed, he had better respect the law of silence from now on. How can we know who this student Zuckerberg really was at Harvard? One man alone dared paint the picture of the little genius without his permission. The only one. His name is Ben Mesrick. In his unauthorized biography, the author describes Mark Zuckerberg as an anonymous student among thousands trying to find his place in the campus social life.
Mark was socially, on his own. He's a very interesting and unique person, very socially awkward. He had his group of friends. People describe him having this kind of sarcastic sense of humor, but it was mostly computer kids.
He's, a short guy, always wore T-shirts, rubber sandals, not a dresser, not at all concerned about his physical appearance.
Not a look that would help the student very much in his romantic endeavors.
My understanding from the people I've interviewed is Mark was not that good with ladies. He's never been great with girls. He wasn't dating a lot of people. And he had a girlfriend starting at the end of his sophomore year who he's with still today. So, he's not your classic nerd in the sense that he doesn't know any girls, but he wasn't, say, king of the campus.
Mark didn't have many friends, but he was to make one crucial encounter with Eduardo Severin, a very rich Brazilian who was clearly quite gifted for business. He was not yet 20, but had already made hundreds of thousands of dollars investing in the stock market. So when the talented speculator and the computer genius got together, it was intellectual love at first sight. They became inseparable.
They had a lot in common. They were both geeky, kind of socially awkward kids who were chasing girls, often Asian girls. They were very smart. Mark was a genius at computers. Eduardo was very good with numbers. He considered himself a businessman.
Eduardo was at Mark's side at the time, but there was also a certain Joe Green. Joe is living in San Francisco today, but he is still close to Mark Zuckerberg. The two friends met at their Harvard fraternity. Fraternities, those private clubs reserved for ambitious young men hoping to expand their future professional network. This was one of the only places where Mark accepted the rules. He put his t-shirts and sandals away in the closet and put on a tie.
I first met Mark Zuckerberg in spring of 2003. He was a year younger than me, but I sort of engineered it so he ended up in the same suite as us. What did we bond over? Probably mischief, pranks.
Mark Zuckerberg, the prankster? That's an unknown side of the little genius. And yet it's that side of his personality that was to make him famous. At the university, at least. It all started with online photo boards, sites where you can find student identity photos. Photos taken for administrative purposes, often bad photos. Former Harvard student Amelia Lester is today a journalist with the prestigious New Yorker magazine. In 2003, she was working on a student newspaper.
The complication with the house Facebooks was that they were only generally available to people who lived in a particular house. So if you lived in one house and the person that you really liked in your literature seminar lived in another house, there was no way to access their photo. Another problem was that the photos in them were not curated. They were the photos that were taken of you when you arrived on campus as a freshman, the first week of freshman year. Everyone didn't know anything about anything. Often you didn't even know your photo was going to be taken. The problem was that you were stuck with that photo for the next 3 years.
One evening in November 2003, while other students were busy partying or doing their homework, Mark was in his room, glued to his computer screen. He had shared a few beers with Joe Green, which loosened spirits up a little, and then Mark had an idea that was to change his whole life. This is what he immediately wrote down on his blog. 9:48 p.m. All right, I've had a few drinks, I won't lie. It's Tuesday evening and it's not even 10 o'clock, so I opened Kirkland's photo board on the PC. The least I can say is that some of those photos are downright awful. And what he wanted to do was make those photos accessible to the whole campus on one site. And to really make things fun, he wanted to run a rather original type of beauty contest. I almost wanted to put photos of animals alongside and ask people to vote which is the prettier of the two. The idea was not in the best of taste, but the young computer expert was very happy with it, and he decided to call his site FaceMash. Always ready to joke around, Joe Green helped him with the page set up for his site. But for once, he tried to rein in his enthusiasm a bit.
My contribution to FaceMash was pretty minimal, just, helping kind of think through what it should look like and how it should work, and kind of pushing away from the barn animals direction.
Mark didn't want anyone spared in his Machiavellian project, so he needed photos of every student in Harvard. And the only way to do that was to hack the campus server. 58 minutes after midnight. Let the hacking begin. First on the list, Kirkland. It was child's play. It was a carnage. The computer systems in every dormitory went down one after another. Mark hacked them with great care and with great pleasure. It was an enormous job that lasted 8 hours. November 2nd, 2003, FaceMash was born. Amelia Lester was alerted immediately in her room.
My roommate sent me an email, because that's what you did. You sent each other emails even when you're in the same room with one another. And she said, you need to look at this website. Suddenly, everyone's photos that they had taken that first week on campus were now accessible to everyone else. And that was a bit of a scary thing for a lot of people. Their hair looked really bad in their photos. They hadn't put makeup on. They were all hot and sweaty. So people were nervous and they were scared. And I think that was actually the reaction more than outrage. It was more like, I don't want this photo to be out there.
In a few minutes, Harvard was on red alert. Thousands of students ended up as unwilling contestants in a giant beauty contest that had all started as a joke. Which of these two women is the sexiest? Do you like mustaches or crew cuts? Long hair or greasy hair? And the scandal spread like wildfire. In just a few hours, 450 students discovered FaceMash and 22,000 votes were recorded. Mark was very proud of himself. His idea had taken over the whole campus. More than a success, his hacking had been a veritable upheaval. And what had started as a joke took on a whole other turning. Mark had not foreseen such a craze for his site. As a result, overuse of it made all the Harvard servers crash. The university deans reacted immediately. Mark the hacker was called up before the disciplinary committee. He could be expelled. And overnight, the grade A student ended up on the dunce's stool. And he didn't understand why.
Didn't really, first of all, see what was so wrong. He thought he had shown them some flaws in their computer system, and he didn't know why people were so angry with him, which I think tells you a lot about Mark. But, you know, he felt like, you know, he shouldn't be getting in trouble for this.
In the end, Mark got off with a warning. It was not as bad as it might have been, so he decided to celebrate with dignity and a drink.
My dad visited shortly thereafter, and right as Mark was getting off, and had some champagne, and he wasn't super happy about us doing this, and preferred that I didn't do any more of these Mark Zuckerberg projects.
What did your dad tell you specifically?
Don't do any more Mark Zuckerberg projects.
Joe listened to his dad, to his lasting regret.
The joke is that, you know, when Mark asked me to help him out with Facebook, and I kind of didn't want to do it because my dad didn't want me to do it, and you know, Mark calls this the X dollar mistake, depending on the size of the valuation of Facebook.
But on that night of November 2003, Facebook didn't exist yet. It was FaceMash that would in fact change Mark's status on campus.
FaceMash absolutely established Mark as someone to look out for. He had created quite a name for himself through FaceMash. People wanted to know what he'd do next.
Among the most curious were a pair of twins in their senior year, Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss. Handsome, rich, top-notch athletes who wanted to get to the top. They also had an internet site of their own, Harvard Connection. The problem was, they knew nothing about programming.
We first conceived of Harvard Connection. It was myself, Cameron, and our colleague Divya Narendra in December of 2002. And the idea was to connect students at Harvard and connect students with students around the country. So it would start at Harvard, a social network at Harvard, and it'd be expanded to other schools around the country.
And as Mark had just proven that in one night he could link the whole campus with FaceMash, the Winklevoss brothers thought they had found their gem. Mark would be able to complete Harvard Connection for them.
Our first meeting with Mark Zuckerberg took place in the Kirkland House dining hall. He got the idea. It was like a light bulb went off. It was very clear. He was visibly excited, and he got it. And we felt that he shared our enthusiasm, our passion for it.
Mark agreed to become their new programmer, but the twins made a beginner's mistake. So pleased were they at having found their man, and in a wave of confidence, they neglected to sign a contract with Zuckerberg. And they never imagined for an instant that, in secret, Mark was working on another site, his own social network. Mark began to skip classes at Harvard. He was completely absorbed in, obsessed by, a new project that he was working on day and night. Despite his promise, Mark was not working on the Winklevoss project at all. No. By January 2004, Mark Zuckerberg was living exclusively for his own site, a social network he intended to call Facebook.
You know, he had the vision that you would build this one social network that would kind of win, that there was such strong network effects that there would be this one social network.
Mark was very ambitious, but he didn't have the financial backing to launch his site. So he quite naturally turned to the richest of his friends, Eduardo Saverin.
Mark went to Eduardo and said, if you put up the money to start this, then we can launch this company and you'll get 30%. You'll be the business head of the company. That was their initial discussion. So Eduardo put up $1,000 and they launched Facebook.
So on February 4th, 2004, with a $1,000 stake, Mark Zuckerberg launched the Facebook. Once again, Amelia Lester was among its very first users.
Telling me you have to go on Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg has done it again. The thing about Facebook, though, was that he was clearly upping the ante a little bit with Facebook. This was something more slick, more professional, and more thoughtful than FaceMash. It was something that clearly he wanted to launch in a more serious way. And immediately it spread like wildfire.
Just 3 weeks after its launch, the Facebook already numbered 6,000 users on the campus alone. And Mark had no intention of stopping there. Very quickly, he decided to extend the network beyond the gates of Harvard. From Stanford in California to Columbia in New York, taking in the University of Pennsylvania, in just 2 months, the Facebook had expanded to 9 universities. It was such a phenomenon that the major American media was beginning to sit up and take notice of the Facebook and its creator. We found the very first interview with Mark Zuckerberg. He was just 19 years old and very comfortable in front of CNBC's cameras.
What is the Facebook exactly?
It's an online directory that connects people through universities and colleges through their social networks there. When we first launched, we were hoping for, maybe 400, 500 people. And now we're at 100,000 people, so who knows where we're going next. We're hoping to have many more universities by the fall, hopefully over 100 or 200. And from there, we're going to launch a bunch of side applications, which should keep people coming back to the site and maybe could make something cool.
Nothing seemed to stop the little genius, and yet Facebook itself was under threat. The young company's coffers were empty. If he wanted to reach all American universities, he would need new servers, and servers were expensive. And the man who could keep the business afloat was Eduardo Saverin. But cracks had begun to appear in their friendship.
And Eduardo was all about trying to monetize it, figuring out ways to bring in advertisers, to sell ad space. And Mark didn't want to do that. He loved the idea of this clean site that wasn't about money. It was a great user experience.
Mark didn't want to spend money on publicity, but his dream was still to supplant all the other sites. So just as he had decided to leave his family for a better school, he now decided to leave Harvard to go set up near the kings of the internet. He left for the other side of the United States. Mark felt himself growing wings. He was ready to shift into high gear. Mark didn't choose his first premises randomly. He set up 10 kilometers south of San Francisco in Palo Alto, the town where the top people met. Mark's first days as a boss were spent in the little house with his 2 colleagues. But there was one important absence in this new life. That was Eduardo Saverin. It was an absence that Mark would not forgive.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg would say that Eduardo wasn't dedicated to the point where he should have been, that he should have come to California, that that's where the company was. Eduardo felt that he was able to do the business from New York. He also wanted to finish college. Did Eduardo make a mistake by not going to California? Well, definitely.
Eduardo didn't know it yet, but his decision to stay in New York would cost him dearly. Meanwhile, Mark and his team settled in. Their Palo Alto house became their headquarters. Very little furniture, a lot of computers, and most importantly, no rules. They even installed a Tyrolean swing between the fireplace and the swimming pool, a sign that their childhood was ever present.
It's a bunch of college kids living by themselves, partying a lot. On the other hand, they were also really hard workers. They would, party at night and sleep until 1 o'clock and then code from 2 to 2 and then party for a couple hours and then start the cycle all over again. But they were very disciplined about work. They worked really, really hard, even though they had a lot of fun too. They were only, 19 years old.
In this relaxed atmosphere, Mark lived glued to his computer screen, programming away, but the young startup company's accounts were empty. Eduardo, the team's businessman, still wasn't there. Too bad for him. Mark decided to replace him. A third man came on board, a certain Sean Parker. Sean Parker was only 25, but he had already successfully created 2 internet sites, among which the famous Napster, a site for exchanging musical files.
Well, Sean Parker is another internet entrepreneur who had already co-founded Napster, and when he heard about Facebook, it clicked in his head, this is probably the thing that's going to win. Sean Parker really is the guy who had the biggest picture vision of Facebook in its early days and helped Mark learn to think even more ambitiously about what he was doing.
Sean was sort of the bad boy of Silicon Valley, quite the opposite to Mark. A charmer and seductive, he went to all the hottest parties. But he was also known to have a very good address book. Finding investors was child's play for Sean. He had everything Mark needed. From among his many contacts, Sean chose a certain Tim Draper, an investor well known in Silicon Valley, a man always on the lookout for a scoop. But this time, he didn't have the nerve.
We offered $20 million valuation the first time, and he came back and we offered a $40 million valuation, and then he came back and we offered an $80 million valuation, and then he came back with a $110 or $115 million valuation, and we said, we can't go that high.
If you had valued the company at 115 and made the deal, how much would that be worth today?
So that would be worth, so if we'd made the deal, I don't like to look at things that way.
Tim Draper is still smiling, but if he had invested $15 million 6 years ago, his shares in Facebook would have been in the billions today. Fortunately for Mark, other less finicky investors were to take the project on, making their fortune as well as his. At the age of 21, Mark Zuckerberg started to grow. Thanks to his new investors, he moved, expanded, and hired a lot of employees.
Some stuff, there's some beer down there.
We found this amateur film. Mark had just moved into his new premises, where the atmosphere clearly is that of a college campus.
We didn't want cubicles, so we got IKEA kitchen tables instead. Yeah. Thought that kind of went along with our whole vibe here.
Within a few days, the Facebook had become Facebook. The site is now worth an estimated $100 million. But Mark didn't seem to realize that he was building an empire. Wearing shorts and a t-shirt, barefoot with a beer in hand, he answered a few questions.
No, actually I'm going to mention the beer. Hard at work. I'm here in Palo Alto, California, chilling with Mark Zuckerberg of the Facebook.com, and we're drinking out of a keg of Heineken because what are we celebrating, Mark?
We just got 3 million users.
3 million users.
Yeah.
And how long has Facebook been around?
Not that long. A little more than a year. Like
a little more than a
at
year.
This point, yeah.
And 3 million users.
Yeah.
And that's a lot for the internet.
I guess. I mean, we're psyched.
Mark didn't let the success go to his head. But in fact, he still wasn't satisfied. 3 million users wasn't bad, but for him, Facebook was just beginning.
We've done just enough advertising and raised just enough money in terms of investment to hire people to make our lives easier and be able to grow it quicker. So that's pretty good. We have a sweet office.
Yeah.
20 employees in all, and their average age was not even 25. The team worked hard, but the rules seemed to be, don't take yourself too seriously. Here, rather than a coffee break, they took a rather acrobatic beer break. The ethic of this young business seemed to be that relaxing is as important as working. But every coin has its flip side. No empire is built without damaging something. The Facebook had existed for a few days. It was such a success that the campus newspaper, The Crimson, devoted a whole article to it. An article that would make the Winklevoss brothers fall off their seats.
We first learned about the Facebook website through the Harvard Crimson. We started reading the article, gee, that sounds a lot like what we were doing. And is that the same Mark Zuckerberg? Maybe there's more than one guy on campus. But it didn't take long for us to realize that it was the exact same guy that we had been working with, and it was our idea. When we read in the paper, we were completely shocked, completely bowled over. We never saw that coming.
A year after they had met, the twins still believed that Mark was programming their site, Harvard Connection. For 3 months, they didn't ask any questions. They were reassured by the more than 52 emails exchanged with Mark.
This is from Mark to us. Sorry, I had to cancel at the last minute tonight. I have a CS problem set.
Mark was, in fact, doing everything in his power to avoid the twins.
This week has been pretty busy thus far. So I think it's probably best to postpone meeting. I'm also really busy tomorrow.
The Winklevoss brothers had complete confidence in their new, talented programmer. There was not a doubt in their minds, while at the same time, Mark was devoting himself totally to the creation of Facebook. Was this strategy on Mark Zuckerberg's part? Why didn't he tell them that he wanted to give up their project? For the twins, the answer was obvious.
Getting there first, even Mark is the first person to admit and acknowledge that it's everything. And that's exactly why he strung us along.
For them, there's no question. The plagiarism was blatant. In 2004, the twins and their friend Divya Narendra filed a lawsuit against Mark Zuckerberg for breaking a moral contract and fraudulent competition. Did Mark Zuckerberg steal the idea of Facebook? 7 years later, the question remains unanswered and is still controversial.
I hate talking about the Winklevosses, by the way. I hate it. I think they're jerks. I think they're extortionists. And frankly, I'm not that interested.
Like Mark Zuckerberg stole your idea.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The Facebook was Harvard Connection, so it didn't exist until after Mark met with us and took Harvard Connection and just renamed it the Facebook.
At that time, no law court had yet settled the question. In 2008, the twins signed an agreement with Mark and Facebook. The figure attached to this out-of-court settlement was $31 million. But that's not the end of the story. In 2009, everything changed. This is Nicholas Carlson, a journalist specializing in new technologies. While investigating the Winklevoss twins' accusations, he came across some documents that were very incriminating for the Zuckerberg empire. 7-year-old instant messages that are very revealing about Mark's real motivations. The twins' accusations never seemed more credible. Mark was talking to a friend from his dormitory room, and here is the proof. In his message, Mark talked about Harvard Connection as a dating site that could detract from him. I think the Facebook thing would draw many people unless it were released at the same time as the dating thing, in which case both things would cancel each other out and nobody will win. Any ideas?
There's a little bit of a conscience play in his mind about what to tell the Winklevosses, because he's not working on their project. But in the end, he tells a friend, you know what, I'm going to fuck them. I'm going to fuck them in the ear. And he goes to a meeting, and he says, and at this meeting, he has a chance to tell them that he's decided not to work on Harvard Connection, that he's worked on Facebook, and he leaves the meeting having not told them that, and just launches the Facebook one day.
Nicholas Carlson obtained these messages from an anonymous source. These documents don't leave much room for doubt. Mark Zuckerberg knew exactly what he was doing with the twins.
Definitely it shows a malicious intent. It shows premeditation. And it really shows you what kind of person he is.
The day the twins discovered these messages, they decided to reopen the lawsuit against Mark and Facebook and to use the messages as evidence. But the final disappointment occurred in April 2011. Their suit was dismissed once more. Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss continued to claim paternity of Facebook and hoped to obtain more shares in the company. But in the Facebook saga, the twins weren't the only ones to feel betrayed. Because Mark had the reputation of being faithless and lawless, notably in regard to his separation from his former colleagues. His old friend Eduardo Saverin, Facebook's first investor, paid the price. In 2005, 1 year after creating his site, Mark dissolved the shares of Eduardo held in the company using an ingenious capital augmentation ploy. From one day to the next, the lifelong friend was pushed aside. Mark never commented on the subject, but once again, instant messages had betrayed him.
Basically, Sean and Mark had just come back from an investment from a meeting with a potential investor, and Sean says, "Oh, that investor was trying to pull some dirty tricks," and Mark says, "You know what? Well, I learned from that investor, and now I'm going to use those dirty tricks on Eduardo to cut him out of the company, essentially." And there's later emails where he says to, or later instant messages where Mark says to another confidant, "Look, we're just going to, cut him out of the company and take the lawsuit."
The message was clear and somewhat brutal, because without Eduardo Saverin, Facebook would never have existed. Mark coldly rejected his best friend. He even went as far as to remove Saverin's name from the list of Facebook co-founders. Betrayed, hurt, and full of rage, Eduardo decided to take him to court. But that wasn't all. He wanted to expose the real face of Mark Zuckerberg to the world, and to do that, he contacted the biographer Ben Mesrich.
So I had been interviewing and talking to Eduardo for about 6 months, and at about that time, my book proposal leaked out on the internet. And when that happened, it kind of created this almost explosion. Eduardo freaked out. You know, he realized people would know what I was writing about. He got very scared. He immediately said he did not want to speak to me again, cut off all contact. I couldn't email him, I couldn't phone call him, nothing. And I have never spoken to Eduardo since.
From one day to the next, Eduardo disappeared from the biographer's contacts. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook had contacted him on the sly to negotiate his silence.
The legal battle between Savrin and Zuckerberg eventually ended with Facebook restoring Savrin on its website as co-founder. Savrin agreed to stop talking to the press, and he was happily, stuck with about a $2.5 billion stake in the company. So he's fine.
Mark Zuckerberg, a controversial success story. With the exception of his original early friends and his former university friends, the young Facebook boss was being criticized more and more frequently by his users. Dismissals, suicides, murders, all over the world, more or less dramatic events were being linked to Facebook. The cause? Divulging personal and private information. Mark Zuckerberg has already betrayed his users' confidence many times over. Kara Swisher is a journalist. She met the young boss many times, and she feels Mark knows exactly what he's doing. But when he has to confront a difficult situation, he tends to run away.
I think the problem he has is that that I've seen a lot with him is he doesn't own what he's doing or own his power. He pretends as if he's normal, and he's not. He's very special because he runs a network that has 600 million people, and he pretends as if I don't know what happened with that privacy thing. I don't know how that did occur. He's the CEO, so he's running that place. I mean, he pretends like he's not, but he is. He's running that place like a fascist dictator. It's what Mark says goes, and everybody knows it. You know, what he does is he makes a very bold action, and then he goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do it," and then he moves ahead again. Like, it's an interesting, it's a good tactic. It works. I mean, he slowly gets what he wants.
Shortly after the site's creation, Mark Zuckerberg was at the heart of many heated arguments. To put a stop to them, he had no choice. He had to respond to the accusations being made about him. He chose to defend himself during a prestigious conference organized by the Wall Street Journal and broadcast on the internet. All the heavies of Silicon Valley had already been through this. It was a place to talk about new technologies. Sarah Swisher did the interview along with another specialized journalist, Walt Mossberg. And like many before him, Mark spent an unpleasant few minutes.
So without further ado, Mark Zuckerberg.
So he was very aware that this was the issue, and so we were surprised when he became nervous the way he did.
Why are you taking preemptive steps that make me go and check and make sure that I have the control I want?
Sure. Well, I think that how the system is set up is a really important part for how it functions. Right? And before I was talking about how there are these two primary things that people do. They share information with the people around them. It's never been, by default, just your friends. It's always been...
Mark hadn't answered the question at all, but the journalist pushed him.
Most recently. And then the other...
But you didn't answer my question. My question is, you seem to have taken some steps to make more public my information as a Facebook member on your own, by yourself, all of a sudden announcing them.
We just kept asking one after the next, and he refused, I think, to really answer the question. And I think when he didn't, we said, answer the question. We didn't ask that. Answer this question.
And as he wasn't answering the questions, the interview got tougher and tougher.
You get a lot of things. Those emails back in college, they stick to you now, whether you like it or not.
Kara remembers an email Mark had sent 5 years earlier, where he wrote that the Facebook users were very naive to have confidence in him. Mark became upset. He began to sweat.
How do you explain the hubbub around it? How do you, and it must affect you as a person because...
Yeah, I mean, when I was 18 or 19 years old, I did a lot of stupid things, right, when I was in college. And I think, I don't want to make an excuse for that. Right? I did stupid things. I think they're embarrassing, and I'm really sorry that I did them. you know, some of the things that people accuse me of are true, some of them aren't. I think a lot of it has been pretty well documented.
Right.
You know, the
Would you like
face
to say
mask
which
pranks.
ones are true?
You know, I mean, I think I actually don't even know, looking back, you know.
Mark was losing it. He was no longer in control of the questions and started sweating even more.
Just started to really sweat, sweat. That's what he did.
Describe how much he was sweating.
Oh, we called Sweatapalooza. You couldn't see it from the audience, but it was significant and disturbing. And it was one of those things where it was doing this kind of thing, about to come off his nose. And one of my worries was that he was going to faint. He was a little white. He looked a little sick. To me, it was a classic panic attack. He said he was feeling not well later, whatever. It just wasn't good for him.
In an attempt to lighten the mood, Kara took a pause and tried to make a little joke.
It's okay. You want to take off the hoodie?
No, I never take off the hoodie.
I know you don't. What's with that? There's a group of women in the audience that wish you would.
No.
Girls?
Whoa.
Wiping his forehead, Mark took stock of the situation. He was looking for a way out, but the questions started coming again fast and furious.
Instant personalization thing was that you did, and why you did it, and what's the value of it to your users?
Maybe I should take off the hoodie.
Take off the hoodie.
Go ahead.
You want to? You want? Go ahead.
To gain time, Mark decided to take off his sweatshirt, but he immediately saw it was a mistake.
Yeah, no, it's a thick hoodie. It's a company hoodie. We print our mission on the inside.
What? Oh, my
really?
God, the inside of the hoodie, everybody. Take a moment. What is it? Making the
world more open and connected.
Oh, my God. It's like a secret
Cool.
cult. Look at that. Making the world open and connected. Stream graph platform, and this weird symbol in the middle that is probably for the Illuminati.
A mysterious logo praising Facebook's values. Kara tried to make light of things, but that didn't seem enough to ease the tension. The interview was a disaster, and Mark Zuckerberg knew it. Vague, unclear, in a panic, he had been unable to defend himself to the press. This was the very worst kind of publicity. That day, he realized how difficult it was to communicate, and he realized that if he wanted to assume his role as Facebook's CEO well, he had to overcome his unhealthy anxiety. Mark was learning the importance of the image, and his painful training was only just beginning because a film on Facebook's history was in preparation. A feature film that was threatening its reputation even more. Thug, traitor, billionaire, the message was clear. The social network was going to reveal the Facebook controversy to the public.
In action!
Like in this clip where Eduardo Severin discovers that Mark has kicked him out of the company.
Mark! He's wired in.
The film presents Mark Zuckerberg as a genius without scruples, ready to step on those close to him to achieve his ends. A few months before the film came out, Mark and Facebook were very worried.
Their media strategy of Facebook was ridiculously panicky. I think that first they got up in the filmmaker's face, which was perfect for the filmmakers. Hollywood people like nothing more than a controversy around a movie. It helped sell tickets.
The release of the film was imminent. It might very well dirty Mark Zuckerberg's public image even further. He was terrified at the idea of speaking in public, but he had no choice. He had to go back in front of the TV cameras if he wanted to restore his reputation. But this time he wanted his performance to be a success. So for days he prepared with communications advisors. And for his return to TV, he chose his program very carefully. In view of this particularly tense issue, Mark got himself invited onto the most viewed program in the United States, Oprah Winfrey's. On September 24, 2010, Mark Zuckerberg was back in front of the cameras with a shock announcement.
Starting the Startup Education Foundation, whose first project will be a $100 million challenge grant.
$100 million?
To the applause of the studio audience and before tens of millions of television viewers, Mark Zuckerberg announced his first gesture as a philanthropist. It was a message that won over the whole of America.
Mark Zuckerberg donated, or promised to donate, $100 million to Newark's public schools. Oprah said graciously, you know, this announcement was going to be put off. We were going to announce it another time, and I insisted that we had a schedule, that it needed to be announced this week. So the company denied that it had anything to do with the movie, but that's a pretty strong coincidence. When Oprah Winfrey touts a book on her show, it becomes a bestseller overnight. So if you imagine Oprah Winfrey having Mark Zuckerberg on her show and saying he's a great person, well, then America thinks that Mark Zuckerberg is a great person.
Mark had proven he was a good person. Now he was going to prove he was an ordinary person. For the first time, he was going to let someone into his own home, and that someone was, once again, Oprah Winfrey.
It's morning in Palo Alto, California. While most people are eating breakfast, the CEO of what might be the fastest growing company of all time is learning Chinese.
So, in this TV clip, we learn about his Chinese studies and that he's going on vacation with his fiancée Priscilla, who he had met at Harvard. In front of the TV cameras, they were not shy about kissing. Here was a young couple obviously in love, living modestly in a rented house. With this scenario, the man who encourages us to reveal our lives on the internet hopes never again to have to talk about his own. Mission impossible. The paparazzo, Nick Stern, has been on Mark's trail for months. Because with the release of the film, The Social Network, the public would want to know every detail of Mark Zuckerberg's life. Facebook had just announced its upcoming move. Nick wanted to be the first to photograph the headquarters of the world's #1 social network.
It's a bit bigger than I expected. This whole building, the whole complex on the right.
This was a different kettle of fish from the little house in Palo Alto. These premises, estimated at $730 million, could accommodate 3,000 employees. A few kilometers away, Nick shows us the company's present headquarters, where Mark would spend up to 18 hours a day. And a few yards from there, Nick shows us Mark's house. It's March 2011, and for the moment, the young billionaire is living in this rented house. The simplicity of it all annoys our paparazzo.
What do you make of this guy who's worth $15 billion, got this 5-year-old car and still in a rental?
I just find it crazy. You know, you would have thought anybody that's worth that kind of money, it's like a lottery win. You go out, you'd have an amazing blowout one weekend, get the Ferrari, amazing house, speedboat, and a drug habit as well, probably the same weekend.
As a photographer, what would you like to see him do after you've been following him all these months?
I'd like to see him spend some of his money and splash it out of it. Make life a bit more interesting for me. Go and change the wardrobe, change the car, change the house. It's all new stuff that people want to know about.
But for the moment, it's rather disappointing. Mark's private life seems completely normal. Maybe too normal. Has he got something to hide?
Now, we're just going to drive a few blocks to the place where Mark Zuckerberg is now living with his girlfriend Priscilla. It's literally 4 or 5 blocks away.
And if, up to now, the day has not been rewarding, Nick's in for a bit of luck.
Just so you know, it's the house with the silver car up on the driveway, so we're just coming up there now. Oh, there he is.
One Sunday, lunchtime, Mark Zuckerberg was leaving his house. Had he spotted us behind our tinted windows? Not necessarily, but Nick was being very careful and decided to park the car.
We need to move because I don't want to lose him.
The paparazzo followed Mark Zuckerberg right into downtown Palo Alto. He hoped to catch him acting like a billionaire.
Let's roll.
No luck. It was market day, 1 p.m., and Mark had just bought a taco, a Mexican sandwich. Our paparazzo stuck close, but he'd missed his chance. Nothing was going to happen. Because in Palo Alto, Mark Zuckerberg went completely unnoticed. Nick Stern could tell you that. Again, today, sticking to his own ways, Mark had behaved like Mr. Normal. The man with the 35th largest fortune in the world even went as far as sitting on the ground to eat. The subject of our investigation was no more than 100 yards away. We wanted to approach him, but the next day we had an appointment at the Facebook headquarters. One phone call from Mark and it would be canceled. We decided to let him get away. Obviously, we would have liked to meet Mark Zuckerberg, but the communication services didn't give us much hope. They had already chosen our guides for the day. The interview with Chris Cox, one of the vice president, took place under high security. The press service even suggested questions for us, the future of internet, for example. But we took another track.
I guess you've seen the movie, The Social Network.
I did. I mean, the movie's completely fabricated. You know, there's very, very little. There's one or two things in there that are true, like what T-shirts Mark wore.
Why do you think Mark didn't want to participate in the movie?
He did talk a lot with David Kirkpatrick, who wrote a book about us that is a lot more close to sort of what actually happened. So we have, you know, worked with people who we felt like were actually trying to tell the story. I think if you look at the movie, that wasn't the goal.
What was the goal?
I don't know, to sell movie theater tickets.
Yes, but that's my last...
Can we move on from the movie?
The head of communications interrupted the interview. A decision without appeal. The social network is a taboo subject. After 3 hours on the Facebook premises, our visit ends like this. Filming Mark Zuckerberg through the window of a conference room. The overprotected boss was quite simply inaccessible. We could find only one solution, the media interview.
If there's suddenly a I don't mind if you pan and see him walking around, or you see him in his conference room. Please don't go up to his conference room and start filming, because it is all glass, and if you start doing that with a camera, it's just gonna be a nightmare for me, and you guys won't be here for very long. Sorry to be a pain in the ass about it, but he is incredibly shy, and he gets very upset.
And while interviews with Mark are becoming rare, answering embarrassing questions is even rarer. The last time that happened was in a report broadcast by the most famous investigatory program in the US, 60 Minutes. The difference with early TV interviews is striking. Mark is relaxed, he's not sweating, and answers questions confidently.
We took the whole company to go see the movie.
The whole company.
I mean, I actually thought it was pretty fun.
But my question is, was it hard to watch for you?
You know, in watching it, it's pretty interesting to see what parts they got right and what parts they got wrong. I think that they got every single T-shirt that they had the Mark Zuckerberg character wearing right. I think I actually own those T-shirts. And they got the sandals right and all that. But, I mean, there were hugely basic things that they got wrong, too. I mean, they made it seem like my whole motivation for building Facebook was so I could get girls, right? And they completely left out the fact that my girlfriend I've been dating since before I started Facebook, right? So, I mean, that's just like...
Wait, what? Say that again? Your current girlfriend, you were dating back then?
Yeah, I've been dating my current girlfriend since before I created Facebook. Yeah, I mean, and, yeah.
Mark is very relaxed. To overcome stress, he adopts the simplest of techniques, learning by heart. A technique proven during this conference that took place a few months earlier. He trotted out the same answer to a happy public.
It's interesting what stuff they focused on getting right. Like, every single shirt and fleece that I had in that movie is actually a shirt or fleece that I own.
Learning by heart was the only way for the introverted young genius to overcome his shyness, his fear of others, the unknown. And the result was astounding. Mark expressed himself clearly and calmly. He even allowed himself to joke in public.
The whole framing of the movie, kind of the way that it starts is, I'm with this girl who doesn't exist in real life, who dumps me, which has happened in real life a lot, and
he won't bring up touchy subjects, but he inspires sympathy, and because of his relaxed manner, people aren't offended by him anymore.
Well, thank you guys.
Confident, even funny, the new Mark has picked up a daunting challenge, erasing the shady areas of his past. Recently, President Barack Obama even asked him for suggestions to help the American economy confront the economic crisis. He even went to his premises to launch his presidential campaign. Recognition, a status that will probably spark new ambitions in the young businessman. He has just bought this property, estimated to be worth $7 million. And the ultimate acknowledgement, the young billionaire was named Person of the Year by Time magazine. At the age of 27, Mark Zuckerberg is probably at the height of his fame. Today, Facebook has been floated on the stock market at $100 billion and has more than 850 million users worldwide.